Hello, I'm Egbert, and I'll be your voiceover guide as these two old blokes go on their journey down memory lane. We start here in the Sutherland Shire on the southern suburbs of Sydney, and head south down the Prince's Highway, a journey that John remembers well from his childhood.
We used to go down to Bega a lot, especially during the school holidays. Dad had an old 1934 Chev Tourer ragtop, and even though it was only about 19 or 20 years old then, technology of cars those days weren't like they are today. And for what only takes about 5, maybe 6 hours today, we used to leave at 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were lucky to get down there by dark. Quite a bit of the road was dirt, and there were a couple of places where there were no bridges over the river. We had to wait for the car ferry and then get on the punt, cross the river and head on further. For us kids, that was a good break in the journey, because it was a long day.
After passing by Narooma, our trip takes us down past Ulladulla, heading for the turn-off to South Durras. Durras has some special memories for Jim from his childhood, and for both of them from when they were in their teens. Durras is a sleepy little seaside village with both a lake and ocean surf beaches to attract tourists, holidaymakers and the locals who live here. Jim's older brother, Richard, has built a charming little holiday home. Complete with all creature comforts, Jim and John are welcome to stay a few days.
In 1950, we moved to Blaxland Road in Ryde, and when we arrived there, Mother decorated the place, including decorations over the fireplace in the lounge room. And the decoration over the lounge was, everyone had them, a set of flying ducks. So for 74 years I've been looking at these flying ducks. They're still in the same order as they took off in 1950.
Old photographs store many fond memories. This old jalopy was part of the furniture at Durras. Jim is in the driver's seat. Younger brother John holds the door, while John Cook looks like he's holding some water for the radiator. Here, John inspects the engine.
Do you reckon this is the place where we pulled up that night in the Plymouth, Jim?
Yeah, this is the place in 1964, 65. Came here, I had a 1955 Plymouth, which had a huge boot, and we pulled up about here before these trees and shrubs were here, and it was dark, so we decided we'd just camp here for the night. So Max Farb opened the boot and he slept in the boot, and in the morning he woke up and or cutting back just before that, in the night he got up and had a little twinkle, got back into the boot and slept. But in the morning he got up and turned left and saw that he was about 3 feet from a 50-foot drop.
This photo was taken at Christmas 1965. It shows younger brother John Gardiner, John Cook and Mary Ann Williams. Mary Ann worked at the North Ryde Psychiatric Hospital with Jim in those days. Goodness knows what they're doing with this young poddy calf.
At the turn of the century, this little building here was the local store, and it was owned by the Strawbridges, and they were parties of mine. And after it was closed down, we turned it into a little holiday shack. We had a kerosene fridge and a bucket for our personal waste. And one day, John Cook, myself and my younger brother were going to empty this bucket of waste over the back fence. And young John was terribly annoying. John Cook, having had enough of the annoyance of young John, reefed him up the tail, lifted him about 6 inches off the ground, which brought all sorts of screaming and yelling, which brought the wrath of God down on the top of the pair of us, and we ended up in what we were trying to get rid of over the fence.
In 1965, Jim and I brought a couple of girls down to the shack. One was Maureen Langton, and the other was the first of Jim's 5 wives, Joan. The girls got up to some mischief with a pine tree at the back of the shack, with me up the tree. But despite their best efforts, that pine tree still stands today. On that 1965 trip, we drove down there in Jim's Mini Cooper. People often said I was a muglair back then. I think maybe they were right. That's Jim in his Mini Cooper, with Maureen and Joan. The area where that was filmed has changed a bit now. Plenty of kangaroos about. And the toilets have been significantly upgraded. There was only one shop there then, and this was the only petrol pump, hand operated. The shop is no longer there, and the site is dramatically different. While the built environment might be different, the natural environment is just as beautiful as always.
At Christmas time, they'd hold a dance in this hall, which was the time before there were power here, and the whole place was about a dozen hurricane lamps that needed pumping up to force the kerosene through. So the tallest person at the dance got the gig of walking around and pumping these lights up. And it was the usual thing with ladies sitting along one wall, the men along the other, and he who's got enough guts move first. And most of the guys were out here in the boots of their cars having a little drink. So it was quite the thing to be. This area here, when we were young kids, we had a 10 by 10 or thereabouts tent. We used to put it here and we lie on the shade from one pine tree. There wasn't much here, only mostly grass. But it was a great area here. Uncle Roy had a bulldozer, and his driver, Lloyd Rose, his name was, he pulled all this area and levelled all the sand dunes, so it was all raw sand, and my job was to get these tea trees, lay them out in windrows to stop the wind blowing all the sand away. So we did all that, and now they've taken off, and the council in their wisdom resumed the whole lot, so wasted energy, but at least the tea trees are still here. These pine trees, they were about 3 metres to 5 metres tall, and now I don't know what they'd be. They'd be 20, 30 metres tall. They're huge.
Jim, I seem to remember somewhere around here you set up a little pyramid of rocks.
Yeah, when you guys were coming down, I went out to the gravel road and set up a little pyramid of rocks so you'd know where to turn off, because this was all just a wild area in those days. Yeah, well, this is Durras Lake on the south side. It's slightly changed here a bit, but we used to come down here prawning in a dark, no moon, and you had to wear tennis shoes because there's fortescues in this water, which I didn't understand what fortescues were until my little toe hung out the corner of my tennis shoe and I stood on one. Well, when you get stung, they sting you until the tide changes, they reckon, or 8 hours. It's unbelievable pain. But in any case, we used to catch the prawns here by the kerosene tinful, which is a 4-gallon kerosene tin, and we'd catch 4 gallons at each night, take them home and boil them up. The amount of prawns in this lake would surprise you.
Hey Jim, I remember back in the day we used to go swimming in this lake. Remember coming down here with, I don't know, a whole heap of people. Mary Ann, Max, I remember John being here, and we had a great time swimming in the lake here.
In areas like this, that is like this valley, my grandfather, in his later years, never worked. He'd get on the horse once every 4 to 5 weeks and ride off to where they didn't know, and he'd come back with a bottle full of gold. So all this area has alluvial gold in the creeks.
After spending a few happy days in Durras, it's time to hit the road again. Back onto the Prince's Highway, south to the nearby town of Batemans Bay.
This is one place where we used to have to wait for the car ferry in order to cross the Clyde River. Then, in 1956, Batemans Bay got a new bridge. Now, in 2021, just a couple of months ago, the old bridge was replaced with a new one.
Batemans Bay is a very pretty place. But we must press on. We want to get down to Narooma today. So we press on down through the lovely little town of Mogo. The next town after that is Moruyra.
The Moruyra River was another place where we crossed on a car ferry, but that was replaced by a bridge many years ago.
We don't stop there though. We are going to stop at Bombala because it has significant memories for both Jim and John.
As a child, I spent quite a lot of time at Badella, staying with my Uncle John, Mum's younger brother, after whom I was named, and Auntie Isabel, and my 3 cousins Tony, Betty and Shirley Boban. The town is different now, more of a tourist town. But back then, Uncle John was the projectionist at the local hall where everyone went to the movies, or pictures as it was called then. We went prawning in Durras Lake and caught prawns by the kerosene tin full. Fishing in the Durras River, driving tractors around the paddocks and having a ton of fun. And listening to and singing the most popular song of the day, Slim Dusty's Pub with No Beer. At the same time, and totally unbeknownst to me, Jim was there in Badella as well.
In 1955, I went to school here at, this is the Badella Primary School. Each row of desks in the classroom was a different year, from kindergarten through to 6th class. They were all different years, one teacher, and the board was split into 6 different areas, so he'd teach 6 years at the one time. This area had an old bomb shelter still there when I went to school, and then up on the hill up here is the school teachers' residence.
From Bodalla, the next town is Narooma, but the boys wanted to get there in plenty of time to book a motel room for the night.
This is Narooma. Our families had a big connection here. Uncle Jack had a sawmill, and the paddle steamers used to come up, pick up the timber, come along this river and out to sea and offload onto the Wee Clyde, which is a bigger ship that used to go up and down the coast. Mother'd been out here fishing a lot when the entrance was really rough, but anyhow, this area just here is a lot of seals. We're out on Montague Island, and they've come in a storm and taken shelter here, and they've decided to stay. So there's a lot of seals along here. Yeah, this is a very picturesque place, and just across there is Brady's parents' place, where we had morning and afternoon morning tea there. So it's a lovely area, just a good place to retire.
After a very pleasant morning tea at Narooma with Brady Clark's mum and dad, Sharon and Peter, we pressed on towards Bega. We planned to stop there for 3 nights and use it as a base from which to visit some surrounding areas where I spent a lot of time as a child. I remember as a kid my grandmother Nana Boban and I would catch the train from Central Station in Sydney to Bombala just near Nowra. It was a steam train which was a big adventure for me. From there, we'd get on a Bartlett's bus and travel the rest of the way to the Brogo turn-off, where the bus driver would swing over to stop on the wrong side of the road, and we'd be met by my Auntie Dot, one of Mum's sisters, and Uncle Les Target. From there, they'd drive us into the farm where they lived. We'll come back and visit that farm after we get settled in at Bega. My childhood memory of entering Bega was crossing over the Bega River Bridge. Of course, that bridge is gone now, replaced with a new one. After crossing the old bridge, the road took us down Poplar Avenue. That's still here, although the road's not used much these days. Then we'd drive past the Bega War Memorial. We'll come back to that later. From there, we'd enter the main street. That's changed a lot too. The co-op store is gone. We used to be able to buy anything in the co-op store. The old clock tower is still there, stuck right in the middle of the road. And the Grand Hotel. We always used to go to town on Tuesdays. Uncle Les would go to the cattle yard sales, and Auntie Dot would buy provisions like sugar, flour and tea from the co-op, while my cousins and I entertained ourselves around the streets of Bega. My grandfather, Pop Boban, would come to town on Tuesdays. He caught the bus from Tathra and spent the day in the Grand Hotel. When he staggered out ready to go home, we kids would ambush him and he'd give us 2 shillings each. Good old Grandpop. Mum was born in Bega and played hockey there. She also worked in the Neon Cafe, where the Bartlett's bus stopped for the passengers to have something to eat. Every town in Australia has a memorial to its locals who served during the wars. Bega's memorial is bigger than most small towns. On the back wall is a list of the names of those who served. Mum's 3 brothers all served during the Second World War, and their names appear here. Alfred Francis Boban, Albert George Boban, and Edward John Boban. My mum served during the war as well. She joined the army, and that's where she met my dad. Her name appears on the back wall of the memorial as well, 4 down from the top. Hazel Francis Boban.
After a good night's sleep and a hearty breakfast, Jim and John head out from Bega towards Brogo. Back in the 1950s, John's aunt and uncle, Dot and Les Target, managed a beef cattle property with their 2 children, John's cousins, Pat and Alan Target. Backtracking north, it's only about 20 kilometers to the turnoff from the Prince's Highway. But just before the turnoff, there are some memories at the Brogo Hall.
The Brogo Hall was a major social centre for the Brogo locals. It looks like it still is. They still have old-time dances here. This is where I learned the progressive barn dance and the Pride of Erin. Up there, on that hill, where the buildings are now, that's where the Brogo School used to be. My cousins, Pat and Alan, used to ride their horses, Trixie and Timmy, to school there, rain, hail or shine. It was a one-teacher school, and it's long since gone now. The road into the Brogo farm always was, and still is, a dusty dirt road. And eventually we found the turnoff that goes down to the old farmhouse. Back in those days, it was a 3,000-acre beef cattle property, but it's nothing like that now. I can see it looks a bit different from up here. The people who live there now were kind enough to allow us to take a few shots. It's hardly recognisable to what it was back when I was young. The kitchen, which was separate from the main house, is completely gone, and it's hard to recognise what's what now. I recognise the rusty roof as the dairy where the 4 house cows were milked by hand twice a day. They were named Big Pet, Little Pet, Daisy and Isabel. And all the gardens are gone. Distant memories. But I shouldn't expect it to be the same as it was after nearly 70 years.
The next trip was to the seaside, at Tathra. This is where the Bega River empties into the sea, and John's grandfather ended his days.
Grandpop Boban used to drive the punt across the Bega River. Legend has it that he used to sit on his veranda with a cold beer, and when someone wanted to cross the river, he'd wander down and ferry them across. He had a wooden rowboat, and I remember fishing these waters with him when I was about 8 or 10. We caught a lot of flathead. Of course, his ferry is long since gone and replaced with this bridge.
The ocean sweeping into the coast at Tathra can get very rough. In fact, there are warning signs on the nearby roadways as people have tragically been swept into the ocean in the past, from what would normally be considered a safe distance. The old Tathra wharf is a tourist feature these days, but long ago, if John's grandfather wanted to travel to Sydney, he would go by ship from this wharf. Shark fishing is prohibited from the wharf, simply because it attracts sharks. And the local swimming club conducts regular swimming events and races from the wharf here across to that beach in the distance. Sadly, a woman was killed by a shark here just a couple of years ago. But they still hold the swimming events nonetheless. After Tathra, it was back to Bega. The next trip would be out to Numbugga, which has quite some significance for John.
Although born in Bega, my mother grew up on a farm at Numbugga, which is a little over 20 kilometres away. I know there used to be a school here. In fact, my mother had to start at the age of 4 just to make up the necessary numbers to keep the school open. All that's left here now is the Numbugga bushfire shed. So we hit the back roads to find the old Boban family farm. And here it is. The property belongs to my cousin now. He bought it when my pop Boban died in 1972. The old farmhouse is still standing, although it's dangerous to enter now. Nana and Pop Boban raised 6 kids in this little house. They had 60 dairy cows to milk by hand, night and morning, before and after school. As you can see, the outdoor dunny needs some repair, as does the house. This photo of my mother was probably taken here back when she was little more than a teenager.
After Numbugga, it was back to Bega to get ready for the trip to Bombala the next day. Bombala is about 100 kilometers away, up the Brown Mountain to the high country. John remembers some exciting trips up the Brown Mountain in his father's 1934 Chevrolet back when he was a child.
The drive to Bombala took us back out through Numbugga again, and then Bemboka, before heading up the Brown Mountain towards Cooma. The Brown Mountain is a 1200 metre climb, which is nothing for the cars of today. But for my dad's 34 Chevy, it was a major undertaking, because it repeatedly boiled, and we had to stop several times to replenish the water in the radiator. So we carried several jerry cans full of water tied to the running boards. On one occasion we ran out of water, and Mum and I had to walk up to the next waterfall where we could refill one of the jerry cans. On the way back, a man stopped and gave us a lift. He had a new Ford Custom Line, and I was extremely excited. I'd never ridden in such a luxurious motorcar. Anyway, we cooled the Chevy down and drove back up to the waterfall and filled up the rest of the jerry cans, and that got us to the top. This lookout is named after Gordon Piper. I remember the story as a kid. He was a bus driver and he stopped to shovel away a snowdrift, but he had a heart attack and died, and now he's memorialised here.
Once up the top of the Brown Mountain, our drive takes us on towards Cooma. But well before Cooma, we turn south and head down towards Bombala.
I don't remember ever having been to Bombala before, but I wanted to go there this trip because this is where it all started for my family in Australia. My 3-time aboard the ship Anna in February 1855. John Robbie was a shepherd from Arbroath in Scotland, and they soon made their way to Bombala, where John obtained employment as a shepherd. Anne gave birth to 11 children in all, the second of whom was Jane Barclay Robbie. At the age of 19, Jane married William Thomas Johnson, and they had 10 children, the second of which was Anne Ballantyne Johnson. In 1893, Anne married John Thomas Thornton at Bombala, and they had 7 children. John Thornton's grandfather was Morgan Joseph Thornton, an Irish convict who was transported to New South Wales for 7 years in 1831 for assaulting a rent collector in County Mayo, Ireland. After doing his 7 years, Morgan Thornton married and moved to Bombala, where he ran an inn known as the Shamrock, Rose and Thistle for a time, and he also became a landowner at Nimbugga. Anne and John's third child was Elvina Lillian Pearl Thornton, and she married Albert Bobin, and they settled at Numbugga. This photo completes the maternal line of photographs showing my great-grandmother Anne Thornton, my grandmother Elvina Bobin, my mother, and the baby is, of course, me. How cute was I? Anyway, we have 3 family names to investigate in Bombala: Robbie, Johnson and Thornton. Let's see what we find. Gee, it's pretty quiet. There doesn't seem to be much around. And it's bloody cold. It's midday and it's only 6 degrees. No wonder the Scots liked it here. They say there's a lot of platypuses in the waterways, but we didn't see any. And the trout fishing is supposed to be excellent, but we didn't catch any. There's an old railway station, but we didn't see any trains. Looks like the end of the line. There's an old tractor shed, and the pubs were slammed shut and wouldn't be open until 5 o'clock. So we checked out the War Memorial. There are 2 Robbies on this wall and 3 on this one, and 2 Johnsons on this one, but no Thorntons. So I asked a local lady in the news agency. She said she knew the Robbies and the Johnsons, but the Thorntons moved away some time ago and scattered all over the place, although there were some in Cooma.
After leaving Bombala, it was a quick trip back down the Brown Mountain and back to Bega for their last night before heading back to Sydney. But there was just one more place to visit on the way back. 2 little towns, Central Tilba and Tilba. John remembers the winding old road that ran through these towns in the old days, and there wasn't much here. But now, they're very popular tourist towns and worth a stopover. Tilba enjoys some notoriety because of the television program, River Cottage Australia, which is filmed mostly in the surrounding locations and centered around Tilba. Finally, Jim and John hope you've enjoyed traveling with them on their journey of happy memories and leave you now with photographic memories of their days as young coppers.